The latest development comes as the China and UK strategic dialogue was held in London. It was co-chaired by visiting Chinese State Councillor Yang Jiechi and Britain Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson. Now, Yang said the two countries should have frequent exchanges at all levels and advance efforts in areas such as investment, trade, finance, innovation, and infrastructure. Now, for his part, Johnson said his country is unswervingly committed to developing a strategic partnership with China and building a golden era for bilateral relationships. Both sides also exchanged views on international and regional issues of common concern.
After an overwhelming vote in favor, the UN General Assembly is going to investigate possible war crimes in Syria. The UN and a number of others have linked all sides in Syria's ongoing war to war crimes. The Syrian government has been accused of torturing thousands of civilians, using chemical weapons, and bombing civilian neighborhoods and hospitals. Rebel factions fighting against forces loyal to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad have been accused of taking hostages to extort money. And ISIS has been accused of recruiting child soldiers, publicly executing civilians, and using homemade chemical weapons. 105 countries voted to investigate possible war crimes, but 15 opposed the resolution. That includes Syria. The country's ambassador to the UN called the investigation a flagrant interference in its internal affairs.
The evacuation of foreign-backed militants and their families from the Syrian city of Aleppo is still ongoing. UN officials in Syria say about 300 vehicles left eastern Aleppo overnight, and on Thursday morning, the evacuations were resumed on Wednesday after militants announced that they had reached a deal with Damascus to complete their withdrawal from the flashpoint city. The Aleppo evacuation is part of a fragile ceasefire deal brokered by Turkey and Russia last week. It also allows residents of terrorist-besieged Fo'a and Kafreya to leave the towns. Press TV's correspondent Mohammed Ali updates us on the evacuation of militants from the Syrian city of Aleppo. Take a look.
Yes, there are some reports on the ground saying that all militants from eastern Aleppo are now out and the city is entirely secured. However, we cannot confirm that until we hear an official announcement by the General Command of the Syrian army and armed forces that the entire city of Aleppo is now secure. We have to wait for a couple of hours perhaps. We are expecting that in a very short period of time today we might hear that official announcement. Now, as you can see, the civilians here, the latest batch, the civilians, the injured civilians from Kfaria and Fo'a are being taken to apartments, better places than the one that we are in now, this temporary shelter center in Homs and also in Latakia countryside and also in Damascus countryside in Sayyidah Zainab. Eventually we have to wait and see what will happen in the coming 2 or 3 hours. Will we hear that official announcement? Will we see the Syrian army also entering the eastern parts of Aleppo in order to calm the area and make sure there are no mines, because this is the first step that will be taken after the entire city is cleared of terrorists.
A House committee found the abortion industry may be illegally profiting off the sale of baby body parts. A select investigative panel released 15 criminal and regulatory referrals to federal, state, and local authorities Wednesday. The panel said they found evidence abortion clinics have sold fetal tissue and tried to cover it up. Chairperson Marsha Blackburn calls the findings disturbing and a misuse of power over vulnerable women. The referrals mark the end of a year-long probe into the abortion industry. An explosion went off outside the headquarters of a Christian lobbying group in Sydney, Australia, Wednesday. A man driving a van with gas cylinders set off the explosion, injuring himself and blowing out the building's windows. Police say the attack was not politically motivated, but the Australian Christian lobby says they've received death threats for supporting traditional marriage. The head of the group, Lyle Shelton, is skeptical and said at a news conference, "You don't just drive around the corner here at 10 o'clock at night, park a van, load it with gas cylinders, then detonate it, unless you're trying to send a message to the ACL." Police said they were investigating the explosion and the threats against that group.
The assassination of the ambassador is very likely to make Turkey change a lot in its attitudes on the Syrian issue. Russia will be more dominant in its diplomacy and will ask Turkey to make more concessions to move closer to Russia.
The foreign ministers of Russia, Turkey and Iran went ahead with a meeting in Moscow 1 day after Karlov was killed. They agree on joint efforts in Syria. And the Russian and Turkish presidents spoke by phone immediately after the incident, agreeing on a joint investigation into the murder and greater cooperation in countering terrorism. Now, Putin said the killing of the ambassador was, quote, aimed at derailing the normalization of Russian-Turkish relations and peace process in Syria. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan condemned the murder, describing it as provocation aimed at ruining Turkey-Russia ties.
Authorities launched a massive manhunt for this man, 24-year-old Anis Amri of Tunisia, the suspect in Monday's truck attack at a crowded Christmas market in Berlin. 12 people lost their lives and nearly 50 were injured. ISIS has claimed responsibility. President-elect Donald Trump condemned the attack after a top-secret security briefing, saying he's been right all along about the danger from certain immigrants.
It's an attack on humanity. That's what it is. It's an attack on humanity. And it's got to be stopped.
Trump seemed to suggest an openness to going forward with his campaign pledge to temporarily ban immigrants from certain Islamic countries from entering the United States.
Amri came to Germany under its open-door policy in 2015 seeking asylum, but investigators say he is a convicted criminal and German terror officials have had their eye on him for some time.
German leaders tried to deny Amri asylum because of concerns about his ties to radical Islamists and allegations involving petty crime, but they were unable to deport him because he lacked the documents to prove he was Tunisian. Protesters in Berlin say the attack is the result of the German government's immigration policy, critics accusing German Chancellor Angela Merkel of allowing in hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers, allegedly without being properly vetted.
Wie viele Leute müssen es sein?
This protester holds up a sign that reads, "Merkel has to go." He refers to European victims of terror, saying, how many people does it have to be? 100, 200, 1,000? Meanwhile, leaders in Berlin are opening up Christmas markets once again under heavy security, encouraging people to get back to normal. These visitors say they don't want to let the terrorists win.
It's taking days away. They're winning.
Mark Martin, CBN News.
The United Nations Security Council is due to vote on a resolution demanding Israel halt its settlement activities in occupied Palestinian territories. The resolution has been drafted by Egypt. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has issued a message urging the U.S. to veto the resolution. The United States vetoed a similar one in 2011. Washington has shielded Tel Aviv against such moves at the Security Council on several other occasions in the past. The UN and the international community view Israeli settlements as illegal and an obstacle to peace.
A contingent of Chinese peacekeepers en route to Sudan's Darfur region. The full complement of more than 200 troops will be on duty by the year's end. In neighboring South Sudan, a new 700-member rotation of troops will be on duty within the week. The UN has approved additional peacekeepers for South Sudan, and it has warned the country is on the brink of civil war. China has more than 2,000 troops serving in UN missions across Africa.
The Colombia-Venezuela border has reopened after a week-long closure. The presidents of both countries agreed to a progressive reopening. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro closed the border on December 12th. His goal was to crack down on smugglers and criminal gangs. Maduro also got rid of Venezuela's largest currency note, provoking anger among residents left with worthless bills.
The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says government forces have taken control of Aleppo. The last of the rebels are said to be brought out of the city, and only one small position in the western outskirts remains under militant control. The United Nations and the rebel groups say evacuations are yet to be completed. The UN has sent 20 more staff to East Aleppo to monitor the evacuation. The International Committee of the Red Cross says about 30,000 people have been evacuated from Aleppo so far. And this is part of a deal between Russia and Turkey after Syrian government forces took back over 99% of eastern Aleppo. And on Wednesday, militants continued to retreat from the west of the city. The CCTV's Hu Chu-Tiao has the details.
Aleppo received the first snow of winter on Wednesday. At 7 in the morning, vehicles from the Syrian Red Crescent and other organizations were waiting in the southwest of the city for militants to board. The withdrawal process has been hard and slow,
that the deal between the government and the opposition dictates that the pro-government supporters must simultaneously withdraw from rebel bases in Al-Fur and Kefraya in the province of Idlib. Syrian state media say the withdrawal of the militants from Aleppo is at its final stage. Wednesday saw a total of 20 buses full of militants and their families departing for Idlib. In turn, 4 buses and 2 ambulances arrived in Aleppo from Idlib. The withdrawal plan was suspended several times as militants burnt down buses and attacked at least 1 bus driver. A Syrian militant official criticized rebel fighters for breaking the agreement and called upon both sides to honor the deal.
There was agreement just to be fulfilled from either parts, and we fulfilled the part which concerns us. But they broke it, and that's why we have to stop till they finish what they agreed with them. They broke this agreement, and we will not allow that. We should recommend that all the agreement should be fulfilled, 100%.
Government forces say the withdrawal process is expected to be completed by the end of the year. Hu Zhuqiao, CCTV.
Well, while President Kabila takes extreme measures to keep his grip on power, the opposition has been gaining momentum. Marie-Roger Biloa is a chairwoman and CEO of Africa International Media Group. She says it's possible the army could soon intervene.
DRC has been living under a sort of low profile, low intensity civil war for years. You know, thousands of hundred thousands of deaths over the 20 or the 10 past years. So this is not new, and we can still have more and more casualties. And Mr. Kabila is ready to kill as many as he can, but the opportunity or the positive option can come from the army and joining the protesters, because we show some signs of that. And maybe this could intensify if there are too many people being killed. Maybe at some point they will say they will just cease fire and join the claim for democracy.
Human Rights Watch reports the deliberate targeting of Mosul civilians by ISIS. The watchdog organization released its report on December 20th, featuring interviews with civilians who fled Mosul. Those who escaped say that as anti-ISIS forces push into the extremist group's last big Iraqi stronghold, ISIS is becoming more desperate. ISIS's biggest losses have been in the city's eastern districts, causing militants to consolidate to western districts. As they retreat to the west, ISIS reportedly orders civilians to come with fighters. Anyone who refuses risks being killed or targeted as an unbeliever alongside the Iraqi army and other allied forces. But civilians also fear going with ISIS to western districts, where it's rumored they will be used as human shields to protect fighters. According to those who spoke with HRW, forces from both sides killed 19 Mosul civilians between the 3rd week of November and the 1st week of December. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Cameron Caldwell.
Mark Zuckerberg just became the real-life Iron Man. The Facebook CEO shows off his latest pet project, lifting the veil on his virtual assistant. Its name is Jarvis. Zuckerberg posted a video online showcasing his system. The simple AI for the home is voiced by none other than Morgan Freeman. Zuckerberg communicates with the assistant through an app that he built. It uses artificial intelligence to understand the user and figure out what to do. Jarvis can play music, make toast, and even keep an eye on his 1-year-old daughter, Max.
Max woke up a few minutes ago. I'm entertaining her.
All right, let's go check on her.
Good morning, Max. Let's practice our Mandarin.
Jarvis, your Mandarin is so soothing.
Zuckerberg's personal challenge for 2016 was to build a simple AI to run his home. His goal was to learn about the current state of artificial intelligence. He believes we're further along than people realize, but still have a long ways to go. For Newsbeat Social in New York, I'm Rumi Fukushima.
Would you be able to recognize a terrorist on a crowded street? Any one of these Christmas shoppers in the heart of Manhattan could be one. It's a dilemma police face every day.
It's not possible to spot a terrorist just by the way they look. To do that would be futile.
Back in November, U.S. authorities issued a somber warning to Americans to be on their guard in the run-up to Christmas around well-known sites. A bulletin from the Department of Homeland Security read, "This holiday season in particular provides additional opportunities for violent extremists to target public events and places where people congregate." According to analysts, the main worry is the lone wolf terrorist, acting without formal backing from ISIL or any other extremist group.
It's the number one concern, and there's so little that can be done about it.
As we've seen with the attack on a Christmas market in Berlin this week, and last July in Nice, France, when a man barreled a truck into a packed crowd near the waterfront, killing more than 80 people before he was gunned down by police. ISIL called him a soldier of the Islamic State, but hinted it had no prior knowledge of the plot. Looking at this map of the United States, I've got to believe the biggest threats are New York, Washington, LA and San Francisco. Is that true?
They are true, but there are threats anywhere. Anywhere there are people who have a rage against life in this country and feel that they have no option other than to indiscriminately kill people.
So what are police doing to head off attacks? In the case of trucks used as weapons, Professor McCree says officers have been to almost every rental site and many dealerships in the area for a quiet word with the managers.
Police officer has been very polite and said, here's what we want you to look out for, and they've been given some characteristics, and just give us a call. Here's our card if you have any concerns whatsoever.
He stresses terror attacks are still extremely rare.
Nonetheless, as you can see, the police are out in force at this holiday market in Columbus Circle. The reality of life in 2016 is that even holiday shopping carries its risks. All we can do is hope there are no planned attacks, and that if there are, the authorities catch them in time. John Terrett, New York.
Explosions at a Mexican fireworks market leave at least 31 dead and dozens more badly burned. Tultepec, Mexico is renowned for its fireworks shopping, but a series of 6 explosions at the San Pablito fireworks market destroyed most of its 300 stalls on Tuesday, December 20th. Displays at the market were packed with combustible merchandise for the holiday season. Mexico State's chief prosecutor tells the Associated Press some victims were burned so severely that neither age nor gender could be determined. As the country mourns, Mexico's Attorney General has opened an investigation. The cause of the deadly blast is still being determined, but the city's emergency services director tells reporters a lack of adequate safety measures is likely to blame. Mexico State Governor Rubio Avila adds, quote, "We are going to identify who is responsible." This was the third time since 2005 that explosions have ripped through the popular market. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Molly Reel. India is now the world's 5th largest economy. It surpassed its former colonizer this week for the first time in over 100 years. Forbes reports that India's gross domestic product is at $2.3 trillion, while the UK's weighed in at $2.29 trillion on December 16th. It's a big landmark for India's economic history. According to Forbes, the UK economy outpaced India's between Britain's 18th century Industrial Revolution and the year India gained its independence from the UK in 1947. From there, the two independent nations grew their economies at about the same rate. Then in 1991, India reformed its markets and began a period of faster economic growth compared to the UK. It appears that growth period is still in effect today. The economic gap between India and the UK is expected to widen. Reports say India's economy will likely grow by 6 to 8% per year, while the UK is projected to grow by 1 or 2% per year until 2020. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Molly Reel.
ISIS claims responsibility for a weekend attack in Jordan that killed at least 10. Gunmen attacked a police station and a castle popular with tourists on Sunday, December 18th. At one point, the militants held 14 civilians captive in the castle, which is located in the southern Jordanian city of Karak. A mock news agency, the de facto ISIS publication, released a statement on Tuesday claiming the gunmen were ISIS members. Those killed included 7 Jordanian security forces, a Canadian tourist, and 2 Jordanian civilians. According to CNN, this is the first attack on Jordanian soil that ISIS has claimed responsibility for. The closest ISIS has gotten to attacking Jordanians came in June when a suicide bomber summer targeted a military outpost at the Jordan-Syria border. In response, King Abdullah told the National Policies Council, quote, "Jordan is strong and is capable of eliminating terrorism." For Newsbeat Social, I'm Cambry Caldwell.
Do you ever get the urge to turn back the hands of time? Maybe erase a few wrinkles or color in a few gray hairs? Thanks to a group of scientists in California, it's not as far-fetched as you might think. Juan Carlos Ispizua Belmonte of the Salk Institute's Gene Expression Laboratory says aging may not have to proceed in a single direction. A new study published in the December 15th issue of the journal Cell details how the Salk team was able to increase the lifespan of mice with premature aging disease by 30%. They also coaxed human skin cells in a petri dish into looking and acting young again. Are these promising steps toward potential rejuvenation in human beings? Yes, but the scientists caution that we humans are complex creatures, and it may be a decade before any of the anti-aging therapies they're working on reach clinical trials. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Molly Real.
Seoul and Washington have reaffirmed their pledge to deploy U.S. strategic weapons to the Korean Peninsula to better counter North Korean threats. The agreement came during the inaugural meeting of senior foreign and defense officials from the two sides. Our defense correspondent Kim Hyun-bin reports.
Foreign and Defense Ministry officials from the two allies held their first extended deterrence, strategy, and consultation group meeting in Washington on Tuesday local time. South Korea's first Vice Foreign Minister, Im Sung-nam, and U.S. Assistant Secretary for International Security and Non-Proliferation, Thomas Countryman, were among those taking part in the talks. Following their meeting, the two sides released a joint statement saying they agreed on the need for additional measures to better suppress North Korea's increasing threats. Washington reiterated it will provide an extended deterrence to South Korea during a nuclear crisis on the peninsula by providing a nuclear umbrella and missile defense shield when under attack. The U.S. also said it will continue to send key strategic assets to the peninsula to better counter North Korean threats and warn the regime against future provocations. The two sides also held in-depth discussions on North Korea's nuclear program and thrashed out ways to put more pressure on the regime. South Korea and the U.S. agreed to launch the meeting during talks in October between their foreign and defense chiefs. Kim Hyun-bin, RTI News.
Since Angela Merkel first announced her famous motto,
"We can do it, and whenever there is something standing in our way, we'll overcome it,"
she was repeatedly seen trying to remain positive in times of horror.
There are always places involved where any of us could have been. I can understand everyone who approaches places with lots of people today with mixed feelings, and the question, am I safe?
Then within a week, 2 more attacks struck in public places on the very same day.
We have managed so much. We will manage this.
With the latest incident in which a truck rammed into a Christmas market in Berlin, killing 12 and injuring dozens more, Merkel appeared not to be banging the drum anymore.
I know that it would be particularly difficult for us all to endure if this act was committed by a person who asked for protection and asylum in Germany.
That's after she was staunchly defending her own policy with refugee and migrant volunteers right at the time when the attack in central Berlin was taking place.
Some people need more time to be convinced, and some don't even listen. It's also a part of the diversity of opinions. In this case, you just have to continue your path. If it crosses the limit, the state has to intervene at some point and say, our lives consist of us living with our diversity, and diversity makes us richer rather than poorer.
I can say that having taken the metro into town, there is no police presence on the German metro in Berlin. The only presence is of ticket takers or controllers. But the sense of security in that metro was zero. It was just as it was in Brussels before the attacks here. If the public is being chloroformed, as it is under Angela Merkel, so that they keep the peace, so everyone is calm and relaxed, and that nobody makes connections between the dots, between her policies on immigrants and the violence that they see in their streets, so long as nobody connects these dots, the level of threat to citizenry will be high.
With Chancellor Merkel's CDU party coming in third in recent polls, largely because of her immigration policy, drastic change may now be required for Germany to get a grip on the crisis. Miguel Francis Santiago, RT.
ISIS sends 3 car bombs to a marketplace in suburban Mosul, killing nearly 24. The attack took place on Thursday, December 22nd in the Gagjali district of eastern Mosul. The Iraqi army recently took control of the area as it fights to oust ISIS from its final big city stronghold in the country. The retaliatory attack included 3 suicide bombers, each driving their own explosives-laden vehicle into the market. A statement from the Iraqi military said at least 23 people died in the blast, including 15 civilians. That number could rise, though, given the dozens injured, and an update from the Saudi-based Al Arabiya agency claims that no less than 30 died from the blast. ISIS has stepped up its attacks on civilians in the territory recently taken from the extremist group. The United Nations said 2 mortar attacks earlier in the week killed 4 aid workers and 7 civilians in former ISIS territory. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Molly Real.
You're watching the World News here on Press TV. We're coming to you live from our headquarters in Tehran. Many thanks for joining us this hour. Russian President Vladimir Putin has called for reinforcing the country's military nuclear potential. Putin said Russia needs to strengthen military nuclear potential, especially with projectiles that can penetrate both existing and prospective anti-missile systems. He was speaking at a defense ministry meeting in Moscow. The Russian president called for careful monitoring of any changes in the balance of power, as well as the political military situation in the world. He called on the defense ministry to be ready for potential threats at the Russian border and quickly adapt plans to neutralize them. Putin also referred to Russia's military operations in Syria. He said Syria has carried out several successful operations against militants thanks to Russian support.
But at the same time, we reviewed a number of other factors, not just the military aspects. We look at our geography, at the history, at the internal state of Russian society, and with this in mind, we can say that we are much stronger than any potential aggressor. But at the same time, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that if we allow ourselves to relax just for 1 minute, to allow for just one failure or pause in the modernization of the army and fleet, the situation might change quickly, because we live in a high-paced world. We won't be able to detect that change. So a lot depends on you. You need to continue this hard work that was started a couple of years ago.
Syria's President Bashar al-Assad says the liberation of Aleppo from terrorists is not only a victory for Damascus, but also for those who participated in the fight against terror, especially Iran and Russia. Assad made the comment at a meeting with Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister Hossein Javadi Ansari in Damascus. He said the recapture of Aleppo is also a setback for all governments that are hostile to the Syrian people and use terror as a tool to secure their interests. For his part, the Iranian diplomat noted that long-time strategic relations between Syria and Iran have helped protect the Middle East against extra-regional schemes for decades. He highlighted Iran's determination to forge closer ties with Syria and provide whatever necessary to support Syrians in the face of terrorism.
Americans are urged to take extra caution when traveling to a southern island in the Philippines. The U.S. State Department issued the warning on Tuesday, December 20th, citing, quote, continued terrorist threats, insurgent activity, and kidnappings on the island of Mindanao. There have been at least 13 separate kidnappings of foreigners reported across the island since January. Earlier this month, 3 Philippine soldiers were reportedly killed in clashes with Abu Sayyaf rebels in Sulu. A military spokesman said security forces were pursuing the Abu Sayyaf in order to rescue kidnapped Malaysian and Indonesian soldiers. Mindanao is also home to Davao City, where a September bombing killed 14 and wounded 69. This prompted the Philippine government to declare a, quote, state of national emergency on account of lawless violence in Mindanao. Davao's government wants the U.S. to soften the language it uses in its advisories, but supports efforts to protect citizens. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Canberra Caldwell.
Pat, Donald Trump has made 2 new picks for his economic team, signaling once again how much he plans to shake up policy in Washington. Trump is creating a new National Trade Council to help spur industrial growth by reshaping trade agreements. He's named economist Peter Navarro to run that trade council. Navarro has endorsed a hardline approach toward relations with China. Trump has also named billionaire investor Carl Icahn as an advisor on regulatory reform. His job will be to slash government regulations that have crippled American businesses. Today, the Trump camp also announced his campaign manager, Kellyanne Conway, will officially serve inside the White House as an advisor to the president.
Ambassador Andrei Karlov was remembered as a kind man, with a character and professionalism his colleagues wanted to emulate. He was a third-generation diplomat who spent 40 years working in Russia's diplomatic service.
According to the President's decision, we've prepared events and proposals to perpetuate the memory of Andrei Karlov. I expect that they will be approved in the near future. But most importantly is that Andrei will always remain in our memory, and we will never forget him.
Karlov's final assignment in Turkey was also the most high-profile. He arrived in Ankara in 2013 and helped smooth ties between Russia and Turkey, who were often at cross purposes over the Syrian war. The ambassador was also credited with playing a critical role in guiding the 2 countries out of a diplomatic crisis after a Turkish jet shot down a Russian military plane last year. Colleagues say the ambassador was insistent that Turkey should apologize. The Turkish president did so in June, and the countries were rebuilding their relationship. From the moment Karlov was killed, leaders of both countries said this was an attack intended to derail the relations between Russia and Turkey, and it would not. But the Kremlin says this has been a blow to Ankara's prestige. President Putin has awarded Karlov the country's highest honor, and Turkish officials say they'll name a street after him in the capital. Natasha Ganem, Al Jazeera, Moscow.